I hope you enjoy this episode of the Freediving Journal. Consider supporting the Freediving Journal and the Freedive Cafe podcasts by joining Patreon. For the cost of a cup of coffee a month, you can get access to extended episodes, uncut interviews, exclusive episodes, early releases, video versions, and discounts on freediving courses, workshops, and coaching from myself. Check it out at patreon.com/freedivecafe and dive safe. Welcome to the Freediving Journal, Episode 8, a deep dive into pre-dive relaxation and breathing. My name is Donnie Mack. I'm a professional freediving instructor, aspiring freediving athlete, coach, and educator, and the host of the Freediving Journal and the Freedive Cafe podcasts. Everything I do can be found at freediveandthrive.com. The Freediving Journal podcast is the ultimate source of knowledge and entertainment for the breath-hold divers of the world. Join my guests and myself for deep dives into freediving news, technique, science, and lifestyle. You can find the Freediving Journal at freediveandthrive.com/journal. The sister podcast to this one is the original Freedive Cafe podcast, where you can listen to long-form interviews with the world's freedivers. You can find the Freedive Cafe at freedivecafe.com, and both podcasts, of course, can be found on all good podcast players. On today's episode of the Freediving Journal, we are taking a deep dive into the topic of pre-dive relaxation and breathing, or breathe-ups, as we used to call them. The entire script for this episode is on the blog at freediveandthrive.com. This is one of the first times that the entire script that I wrote has been up there. It's 8,500 words long. So if you prefer to read this information that's coming out today, then go to the website and check it out, freediveandthrive.com. Before we get to that, a quick bit of housekeeping and an update from my end. I'm in Dahab right now. I'm just on the tail end of recovering from COVID. I first got symptoms about 2 weeks ago, and it hit me pretty hard. Anyone who tells you COVID is just a little flu now and it doesn't make you that sick doesn't know what they're talking about. I got very sick. I was already vaccinated, and I'm still suffering from the after effects. I'm definitely on the mend now, but I still can't smell anything, and I have the worst cough I've had for years. I'm back in training though. I've had a couple of days in the water, diving some shallower dives, and I'm really going to try and be patient with myself and test the body and how it feels after COVID. And well, it doesn't feel great. I'm getting out of breath after dives, which I don't think has ever happened to me before in my entire freediving journey so far. But I also feel at the same time that the diving process, the pressure and the time in the water are healing to the lungs and the chest. So hopefully I'll recover fully and quickly now. I made a little vlog talking about my COVID experience. It's, I was a little bit bored, so I did that. It's on the YouTube channel, Freedive and Thrive. If you see that and you think you'd like to see more vlog-like material like that, like a once weekly update into training, life in Dahab, life in Taiwan when I'm back, etc., then let me know in the comments. It's not something that I'm super comfortable with, but I would like to do more if there's interest in seeing it. There's still a real dearth of freediving entertainment and content on the internet at this point. I'll still be here in Dahab for another couple of months. If you want to learn freediving level 1 or do your level 2 or 3 with me, this is your chance this year. I'll be running individualized and special freediving courses while I'm still here. With me, a level 1 course is a minimum of 4 days. It's a much slower pace and more extensive content than most courses, and the price includes up to 6 open water sessions. So if you're looking for a less rushed option and something a bit more personalized and catered to your personal needs, then get in touch. The quickest way is through the contact page at freediveandthrive.com. Quick shout out to Patreon supporters and a special hello to new patrons, Johnny and Wendy. Sorry if I've missed anyone. I don't check in very much because of the site being blocked here in Egypt. But thanks for choosing to support this project. I do here, if you are a Patreon supporter, you will find an audio file on your Patreon dashboard that contains all the submissions from today's guests, uncut and uncensored. Much of it I didn't use in the final edit. Now you can also find that on the main website at freediveandthrive.com/members. To support the Freedive Cafe and Freediving Journal podcasts, visit patreon.com/freedivecafe to find out more. And I'm actually getting out of breath just reading this right now. A massive thank you to everyone who supports. Okay, I know you've been waiting a long time for this next deep dive. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think. Let's dive. Okay, let's talk about pre-dive relaxation and breathing. In the 2 or 3 minutes before our departure into the deep blue, we are usually engaged in some kind of pre-dive breathing and relaxation process. Traditionally, this part of the dive is called the breathe up, though we might also call it the relaxation phase, the preparation phase, or the ventilation phase. Whatever you want to call it, for these few minutes before the dive, our attention is generally focused on achieving the maximum degree of relaxation possible and attending to our breathing process in order to positively affect our physiological and mental state. In this episode, we're going to explore our options for the breathe up. We'll have a look at some key principles, some techniques, and some tools for optimal dive preparation. And we'll hear directly from many of the world's top freedivers about how they spend those last few minutes before their dives. The way this episode, the way the script and the article evolved has kind of moved beyond what I was originally asking them, and that's why it might seem like a little bit of a hodgepodge of ideas and mixed in with the audio here. But it is what it is. I enjoyed putting this together. If you want to read this as an article, you can read it on the freediveandthrive.com website. Go to the blog there. And you can also read excerpts from the audio there as well, if you prefer to read. Let me start by saying that there are many ways to skin a cat, and what works for one person may not be the best strategy for the other person. There may also be some controversy around some of these topics, especially around the use of hyperventilation or even just deliberately manipulating the breathing pattern in any way before a dive. And although I'll do my best to be as objective as possible, I can't help but also offer you some advice based on my own experiences and feelings on this topic, and you can make of it what you will. Never forget that you are free to make your own decisions. I think we can all agree that the main goal of the pre-dive phase is to maximize physical relaxation in the body, calm in the nervous system, and peace of mind in the diver. So that can be seen as a 3-component goal. We can also look at it as body, breath, and mind. Now, all 3 of these components are intricately linked, and each one affects the other, of course, but each one, body, nervous system or breath, and mind, can be influenced individually with certain techniques, and we'll consider a few of those techniques and how to learn them. Ultimately, we're trying to get to the same location, but we might enter through a different door to get there. So we'll consider a few of these techniques and how to learn them, and then you'll have a toolbox of practices that you can dig into to build your own pre-dive routine. Before we start talking about techniques, let's consider our outer environment for a second. We are, of course, assuming here that the diver is reasonably warm and comfortable, well hydrated, and not suffering from the heat. Let's also say the surface conditions are calm, not too choppy, not too swelly. In other words, we have perfect diving conditions for today's discussion. Now, I will be describing things here from the perspective of a diver in a deep dive or competition setting, but that doesn't make this information exclusive to sport divers. It's just that in this setting, we see the need for the most refined preparation, and the lessons learned here can be applied to any other breath hold diving modality. When teaching a freediving course, I often apologetically explain to the students that because of the way the education systems were developed, we will be learning competition-style diving, but the advantage of this way of learning, with a buoy and a rope and the disciplines of free immersion and constant weight, etc., is that the techniques, skills, and safety protocols that you learn here can be carried over to any other freediving activity. And we're mainly going to be focusing on the pre-dive phase before depth diving here. We won't cover in great detail about any deliberate hyperventilation that is very often used before statics, except briefly a bit later. We'll hear a little bit about that, but that might require an episode of its own. So now we're all snug and warm on the surface, and we've arrived at the place where we are going to dive. Now, the first component we wanted to work on was bodily relaxation. So I think we should start by giving some consideration to the body position that we relax in. Maximizing physical relaxation in the body requires that we choose a position in which we can remain completely motionless. Now, assuming that we have nice surface conditions, not too choppy or wavy, then we can choose one of several relaxation positions in which to do our breathe up. We can lie face down in the water, breathing through a snorkel. This can be done with a mask or with just a nose clip. We can lie floating on our backs, breathing freely on the surface, or we can sit in a more upright position like sitting on a chair. Which position you choose really depends on personal preference. I see all levels of divers choosing based on their personal preferences, and the discipline you will dive may also affect which relaxation position you choose. I think it's also important to be able to dive well from any position and without much rest, especially if you're an instructor, coach, or safety diver. But let's say we're preparing here for a max effort dive in perfect conditions. The first person we're going to hear from today is Miguel Lozano. Miguel was on episode 67 of the Freedive Cafe. Miguel is going to give us lots of information, especially about the few minutes even before he enters the water, and then after he enters the water, about the physical body position and relaxation position that suits him.
So normally before I enter to the water, I try to be completely relaxed and just say if it's sunny, I put something like a cap on my face or whatever, just to try to relax my eyes and just to focus on the dive itself and my breathing, but not focus too much on the breathing. Just try to be calm and listen a bit what is happening around, but with not too much attention. I can hear the dive of the other people. I can hear the countdowns of the others. It's just like a dreamy, let's say, sounds. Then when I listen these 3 minutes before my top time, then I enter into the water. Lately I'm using fluid goggles, but I've been not using it. So I can use it or not use it. I think it's important to get used to all the condition and all the equipment, so I can dive with everything. Then I put my nose clip, and then I start to breathe through my snorkel. I've been in the last decade. I've been breathing head up, head down, face up, with the snorkel without. And lately, I've been using this breathe up with the snorkel. For the main reason is because I like the position just already, so I don't need to change my position to go down. I'm already like facing down. See if I'm doing free immersion or constant weight or no fins, I can do the duck dive already, so I don't need to turn. But the main reason is because I can put my ears underwater. So this helps me to listen the sounds of the countdown, more like a dreamy sound. It's not clear sound, so it's more like blurry, let's say, blurry sound. And instead to like 1 minute clear, I can listen like 1 minute, a little more far away. So it makes me this state of mind to be completely relaxed. I keep my breathing like normal ventilation, like as I was going to sleep. Then every 20 or 30 seconds, I do a one breath long, a stronger breath up, a stronger breath. So like just to release some tension, just to oxygenate a little bit more. But I keep all the time with this short breathing, just to keep my heart rate down. And this long breath, just to increase a little bit the oxygenation, and just to also to relax and be a bit more full of air in my lungs, a bit more stretchy. Then I wait until the 20 last seconds. When I hear 20 seconds, I start to breathe, belly, chest. I focus on belly breathing until I fill it up with the chest. And then I start to pack. I could pack maybe 40, 50 packs, but I think every time I try, I always have more narcosis at depth. I feel a bit more uncomfortable. Also, the buoyancy, I'm already kind of buoyant diver. So if I put too much air, I feel like I'm very buoyant, so I have to do a lot of effort. So I do around 13, 14, 15 packs, and then I go.
So the face down breathing through the snorkel position is in some ways the easiest position, as there's little danger here of water getting in the mouth or distracting water getting in the eyes. But this does require breathing through a snorkel. For me personally, I don't find this a very relaxing option for deep dives at all, mainly because my breathing feels restricted and my ability to take a really full inhale is compromised by the snorkel and the mouth position while the snorkel is in the mouth. But it works well for many people, even if it is uncommon to see in competitions. I also see some people do the relaxation phase through the snorkel and then bring their heads out of the water at the last moment for the final breath. It will really depend on what ritual you have developed for yourself and what cues stimulate the physiological responses of relaxation. This is absolutely crucial to develop an automatic response to certain cues and a positive response. For me, a snorkel in the mouth triggers a negative response. It produces a tiny little bit of anxiety, but for others, it may be the key that unlocks the door to relaxation. Putting your snorkel in the mouth might instantly start to reduce your heart rate if that's how you've trained yourself. It's all about training your body to respond positively to certain stimuli. Resting on the back can indeed be very comfortable, but this option works best in very calm conditions. Otherwise, there is a high risk of water splashing into the airways. What you tend to see then is that the diver is using some kind of flotation aid, commonly a swimming noodle under the neck, sometimes also under the knees or ankles as well. The trouble for me here is that my legs are very sinky, even in a wetsuit, so I usually need not only a noodle under my neck, but also a noodle at my legs to feel really supported. And just having to deal with two noodles while preparing for a dive adds a slight dimension of stress that I prefer not to have. It would kind of be perfect for very flat water in a competition setting where everyone is taking care of my needs, but to go out day after day and in training and make sure I had the two noodles and dealing with the different water conditions means that it would be very inconsistent. But again, it depends on what you're used to and what makes you feel right. My personal chosen relaxation position recently, for about the last year, for most dives, is the upright position, sitting straddling a flotation device. This is becoming more and more common to see, it seems to me. Often two noodles will be taped together to make a little seat to support the weight of the diver. I actually use a kind of a child's safety vest thing from Decathlon. It looks a little bit ridiculous, but is perfect for the purpose. For me, the main benefits here are that it feels the same. It's consistent in both calm and choppy conditions. The face stays out and away from the water, which means it's very easy to breathe through the nose in this position. And I give a lot of importance to nose breathing for relaxation. I might also just add as well that the dive response and how strongly the dive response is activated may also be, at least according to the conversations that I've had with my guests here, have a lot to do with the contrast, not the actual temperature, but the contrast in temperature between the outer temperature, or the temperature of the face, and the temperature of the water. And having a bigger contrast may lead to a stronger dive response, but we'll have to look into that more. The main disadvantage of the upright position, as I see it, is that the chest is submerged deeper in the water. So then when it comes time to take the final full breath, there is already some restriction from pressure on the chest. So I feel I can't reach my absolute fullest potential when filling my lungs compared to when I lie on my back, but I compensate for that by working a lot on the technique of my full breath inhalation. Whatever position it is that you choose for your breathe up, the most important thing is that you will be able to spend 2 to 3 minutes there, completely motionless, or making only the most minor adjustments. And yes, 2 to 3 minutes is enough. Relaxation is a skill, and more time does not necessarily mean more relaxation. If you can't reach a good state of relaxation after 3 minutes, you probably won't be any more relaxed after 10 minutes. Okay, let's hear from the world's deepest no-fins diver, William Trubridge. William Trubridge has been on the Freedive Cafe episodes 69 and 98. Here he is talking about his dive preparation.
The last 2 minutes before the dive begins are crucial to the success of the dive itself. In fact, I often say that the dive is determined in those final few minutes before you start. And then everything that happens after is just kind of proof of whether you have done the right kind of preparation. And we often, in the past, referred to it as the breathe up, and still some people do. It's the easiest kind of name for that phase, even though we've kind of discovered that breathing is not the most important feature of the preparation for a dive. It's relaxation. If you kind of think of it as a breathe up, and the fact that you need to do something different in your breathing, then you're putting the emphasis on the wrong place. In fact, the breathing should just be kind of natural, shallow, diaphragmatic, slow. Doesn't need to be anything special. It doesn't need to be deep or with any kind of count for the in and out. Breathing as you would when you are falling asleep or reading a book is ideal for the preparation. So if you can just kind of take your mind out of the equation with breathing and focus on your relaxation, then that's the better approach, because breathing is not going to increase your oxygen levels in your body, whereas relaxation can actually increase your oxygen levels by reducing the amount of oxygen that your body consumes so that you store more oxygen in the venous blood, the blood that's coming away from your tissues, organs, and systems. If those tissues, organs, and systems have used less oxygen because they were more relaxed, then you are storing more oxygen in the venous blood, which, remember, is 2/3 of our blood in the body. And that means that you start with more oxygen molecules to fund your efforts for going deeper. So the relaxation phase is the better way to look at it. And yeah, in my case, that's all I'm trying to focus on, is just sinking into a deeper state of relaxation before the dive, and then trying to hold on to that and take that into the start of the dive as well.
Okay, so Will straight away makes it clear that his priority is on relaxation and the benefits of focusing on relaxation for oxygen availability, and he gives little attention to breathing techniques. He says that breathing is not the most important factor, which often comes as a surprise to many newcomers to the sport. But you'll hear that it is a common theme here in what the athletes have to say. I 95% completely agree with this statement. Maybe not 95, maybe a bit less than that. I agree that relaxation is the most important aspect of pre-dive preparation. But I think that possibly by discounting certain breathing techniques as far as they aid in that relaxation, we may risk throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but more on that later. Let's hear now from world record holder Mirela Kardasevic. She appeared on episode 112 of the Freedive Cafe.
During the last 2 minutes of my breathe up before the official top, I focus on relaxed breathing, natural breathing, without too much effort, because that way I can focus more on my calm state and entering the zone. I don't really practice hyperventilation, so the only time I take a deep breath is before my last deep breath, so I can release the tension, and then I take the deep breath and I start packing. But before that is just natural breathing, relaxed breathing, so I can lower down my heart rate as much as possible.
Yeah, so again, Mirela is not focusing on any special breathing technique, but she wishes to lower the heart rate before a dive. Reducing the heart rate, starting with the lowest baseline heart rate, is the main reason for staying completely motionless. Of course, reducing resting heart rate is a whole other topic, perhaps for another episode. The less we are moving and the less tension we hold in our bodies, then the oxygen demand of the skeletal muscles and other parts of the body will be lower, and the heart rate should be lower too. Many people are familiar with the idea that the brain is responsible for about 20% of total body oxygen consumption, and despite only making up 2% of its mass. And interestingly, that doesn't change much regardless of whether you're asleep or awake. But few know that the liver also uses nearly 20%, resting muscle uses about 20%, and the heart uses about 10 to 12%. What this means is that when it comes to things we can control to reduce oxygen consumption at rest during our pre-dive phase, the heart rate and muscle use are probably the two main things. And the best start you can get to reducing your heart rate is to stop moving, to stop the demand from the skeletal muscles for more oxygen and blood. Now, keeping the body still and motionless is a good start, but that does not mean it is also fully relaxed. I'm sure most of you understand this. You can be lying perfectly still, but with your heart racing away. Think about camping out in a wild area at night and suddenly you hear something moving outside close to the tent. You are suddenly hyper alert, your heart rate starts increasing, but you won't be moving 1 nanometer lest you risk giving yourself away. So I'd like to offer now some tools to aid in developing the skill of deep bodily relaxation. Did you know that you can practice deep relaxation out of the water and then apply the skills you learned during the breathe up before your dive? There was a time when I was around 25 years old when I did not realize the slightest thing about deep relaxation yet. At that time, I was suffering from severe panic attacks. I was in a constant state of hypervigilance, and my body was always tense and buzzing. I couldn't get any rest. I was completely exhausted all the time. It was a nightmare, and I couldn't sit still for 60 seconds, and I couldn't find any way out except for alcohol until one day I tried something called Yoga Nidra. So Yoga Nidra is a kind of guided meditation and deep relaxation experience. On a deeper level, it's a kind of reprogramming of the personality, as all true yoga is. It's where you lie down in a comfortable position and follow the voice of the instructor as they guide you through a sequence of awareness instructions, placing attention on different body parts, visualizing certain sensations, and working with the breath and the senses. I was absolutely blown away by this first Yoga Nidra session. After weeks of suffering, all I had done was listen to this 30-minute audio track, lying down on my bed, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like the emergency alarm had been switched off, and I was able to get on with my life. What I would later learn was that I had been in a constant state of sympathetic nervous system overactivation, And through this guided experience, I had downregulated that using my own thoughts and attention. The sympathetic nervous system is the so-called fight or flight part of our nervous system, which when stimulated increases the heart rate and blood pressure and suppresses digestion. Now, I had turned up the volume on my parasympathetic nervous system, the relaxation part of my nervous system, which reduces heart rate and blood pressure, and I felt great. I finally was able to really let go. I suddenly understood what it meant to be deeply relaxed. At least I was well on my way. It was then, for the first time in my life, that I realized that deep and profound relaxation is a learnable skill that anyone can learn. And now I believe coaching people on these practices in my workshops is one of the most valuable things I do as a freediving instructor. Many, maybe even most of us in modern, affluent, developed society are stuck with overactivated sympathetic nervous systems, and it leads to all manner of suffering and medical conditions. But as a freediver, it means that you will not be able to maximize your pre-dive relaxation. Yoga Nidra and other practices similar to it, such as autogenic training and body scanning, have been termed non-sleep deep rest by Andrew Huberman, or NSDR, and it's going to become a bit of a trendy buzzword quite soon, I think. These practices are a great way to train the skill of relaxation in such a way that it can be carried over to the water, let alone the other positive benefits it can have in your life. Autogenic training is a similar practice, though originally with a different purpose. Like Yoga Nidra, it's a kind of self-hypnotic technique and has been described as repetitions of a set of visualizations that induce a state of relaxation and is based on passive concentration of bodily perceptions. For example, heaviness and warmth of arms, legs, which are facilitated by self-suggestions. The technique is used to alleviate many stress-induced psychosomatic disorders. It's very similar to what we're doing with Yoga Nidra. You can download audios of Yoga Nidra. I will link to some in the show notes at freediveandthrive.com. You can download an app which takes you through autogenic training. You can now also find guided audios simply called NSDR. Non-sleep deep rest on YouTube, and I'll put a bunch of links to get you started in the show notes, like I just said, on freediveandthrive.com. The main point here is that we can train our bodies to be better integrated with our minds and become relaxed when we activate a certain kind of mindset. For example, the mindset of getting ready for a deep dive. I've taught hundreds of students to freedive, and the deep relaxation component is there in every freediving course. So when we start on day one, we do a dry training session to practice our first breath holds. And the first thing I teach is an abbreviated form of this non-sleep deep rest technique. The basic idea is that we start by scanning around the body, starting with the heavier parts of the body like the legs and the arms, checking that they are completely soft, heavy and released. Moving on to the shoulders and neck, then the small muscles in the face, jaw and mouth. Then we turn to the breath, allowing the belly to expand naturally on the inhale, relaxing the face muscles again on the exhale. After a few rounds breathing like this, creating a meditative positive feedback loop of relaxation, we might focus on the sights and sounds around us, the smells in the air, or the sensations on the skin, all while ignoring any intrusive verbal or visual thoughts. And this forms the basis of the meditation that we'll discuss later on in this episode. But simply thinking about it as a relaxation technique right now, this 2 to 3 minute process is usually enough to bring the student to a very relaxed state, and with practice you will be able to run through this process without the guiding voice of an instructor, and even faster. Eventually you might find yourself just naturally relaxed, physically, mentally, and in the breath as you prepare for your dive. That's the ultimate goal. You will have kind of programmed yourself to be relaxed in this situation. If you go to the show notes for this episode at freediveandthrive.com or to the Freedive and Thrive YouTube channel, you will find a 3-minute guided pre-dive relaxation audio track that I have recorded so you can see and experience what I mean for yourself. So now that we've looked at how to work with the body through active relaxation, we now come to the level of the breath and what we can do with it to aid our relaxation. So how do we work with the breath? First, it's important to understand again these two main divisions of the autonomic nervous system. As I mentioned before, we have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. There's also a third branch, the enteric nervous system, which is more involved with digestive function, but we'll pass that by for now. Activation of the sympathetic nervous system leads to a state of overall elevated activity and attention. This is the famous fight or flight response, blood pressure and heart rate increase. The parasympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, promotes the rest and digest processes, and most importantly, the heart rate and blood pressure lower. So generally speaking, our goal before a dive would be to have a stronger parasympathetic nervous system activation. But, and this is a very important but, you don't want to have such a strongly active PNS that you are on the verge of sleep. There needs to be a certain level of readiness and attentiveness, especially before a big athletic performance. Now, when you practice one of the deep relaxation techniques I mentioned above, perhaps you learned through yoga nidra or autogenic training, you're already promoting a parasympathetic state. But what we haven't spoken about yet is how the breath and what we do with the breath is for sure the most powerful method we have of influencing the nervous system. Let's hear from Walid Boudhiaf. Walid has been a guest a couple of times in the Freedive Cafe. Number 29 was the first one, who explains how he slightly manipulates the breath before his dive, as many of us actually do.
So the kind of breathe up I usually do is as follows. What I do, I usually start by calm nasal kind of breathing for a minute, maybe. It allows me to relax everything. And then I switch to the mouth once I put my nose clip on. And I do a very gentle shallow kind of breathing, preferably using the diaphragm, but then I don't put too much attention into it. I just do it as much as naturally as possible. And so I would do a gentle breath in, again, very shallow. And then the exhale might be a bit longer through pursed lips with the nose clip on. I typically do this, usually I do it for 3 minutes, and then by the end I perform what some might call a flush breath. I prefer to do them, it's just a habit I have, so I prefer to call them sighs, like kind of deep sighs. So it's again very, very gentle, so to avoid any kind of hyperventilation. So the inhale is slightly bigger, very, very, again, very gentle and almost passive, yeah. And then I basically release in order to exhale. I release the breathing muscle, okay? And I do this for just a couple of breaths. And that's pretty much it. Then I start backing. I mean, if it's a big dive. If it's less than 80 meters, I wouldn't. What else can I think of? I would like to describe, I mean, maybe that's what I do with the breathing itself. But then I take advantage during the breathing to, go through the mental preparation, have a strong kind of relationship with the dive site itself, with the rope, with the setup, with the ocean, with the depth below me. I try to incorporate all that. I try to connect with it. I completely surrender. I completely let go. I think about something funny. I try to fill myself with feelings of joy in order to avoid any kind of stress. And during the exhales, I try to just let go. And sometimes if I have some kind of issue or tension or stress, then I would use the breath out in order to release all those to the bottom of the sea, so to say. So I just exhale and let go all these negative feelings.
Now, many of the guests you will hear today will say that they try to avoid any special breathing technique before a dive. That's completely normal, and especially any big breaths. And if you've taken a level 1 freediving course, then you will know that the reason for this is that they are trying to avoid hyperventilation, or at the least hyperstimulation. But this time we could hear from Walid giving a little more information about exactly how he breathes before a dive. And while we can't say he was using any hyperventilation technique, he certainly is manipulating his breath in some way, and there's good reason for that. Just to recap, hyperventilation or overbreathing, simply put, creates an imbalance in the body's level of O2 and CO2, which increases the alkalinity of the blood. When the blood becomes more alkaline, oxygen binds more strongly to hemoglobin and less oxygen is available for use by the body tissues. In other words, hyperventilation may lower the potential amount of oxygen available to you on a dive, which of course isn't a good thing for a freediver. Now, this is where some controversy enters the picture, and it stems from the fact that certain people in the freediving community through the years and in some of the education materials have very strongly warned against any kind of breath manipulation before a dive, even giving the impression that any kind of breathing whatsoever that is not normal tidal breathing is hyperventilation and therefore dangerous. Well, it's simply not as straightforward as this. This is a very simplistic and superficial view. And while I do agree that this is the safest way to explain and educate absolute beginner-level freedivers about the sport, there are also layers of nuance available for the understanding of intelligent, sensible, and more experienced freedivers who wish to think for themselves a little bit more. The breath is the single most powerful tool we have in regulating our nervous system. Through correct use of the breath, we can increase our relaxation and lower our heart rate, all while maintaining perfectly safe levels of O2 and CO2 in the blood. First of all, hyperventilation simply means that you are moving a larger overall volume of air over a certain time frame into and out of your lungs compared to normal tidal breathing. At the lower end of average, we breathe around 12 times per minute. Each breath moves about half a liter of air, meaning that we move around 6 liters of air in a minute. In the highest levels of pranayama, or yogic breath work, that I have practiced, the breath rate is reduced to once per minute, inhaling for 30 seconds and exhaling for 30 seconds. In this kind of breathing, the heart rate remains low to normal, and a small amount of air hunger is experienced towards the end of each inhalation and exhalation, which is partly the goal of the exercise. So we can assume that there is not only a drastically manipulated breathing rate, once a minute is 12 times less than 12, obviously, but also a slight hypoventilation or underbreathing rather than overbreathing. What is important to know is that when you exhale, your heart rate slows down, and when you inhale, your heart rate increases. So what I practice, and what many top freedivers also practice in the moments before their final inhalation, is to gently prolong the length of the exhalation for a few breaths, sometimes just a couple of breaths, sometimes up to a full minute. Many of the people I have dived with who would say that they don't do any kind of special breathing before they start their dives, you can hear them beside you doing something like this. When you prolong your exhalation, parasympathetic activity is significantly elevated, and on top of that, HRV is increased. HRV, or heart rate variability, is the fluctuation of the length of time between heartbeats. More fluctuation or higher HRV is associated with a better ability to tolerate stress, better emotional regulation, better decision making, and better attention. All of which, I'm sure you'll agree, would be welcomed before any deep dive. Even reducing the rate of the breath, but keeping the inhale and the exhalation the same length, In one study, we find the example of a 5.5 seconds inhale and 5.5 seconds exhale. This achieves the same increase in HRV, but I'm not recommending that you do this before a dive. I strongly suggest against trying to count your breaths or match the inhale and exhale lengths, because this will interrupt the natural and, as Stefan Randig puts it, instinctive breath. Tom Peled has some interesting and sensible views on pre-dive breathing. He appeared on episode 120 of the Freedive Cafe. Let's hear what he has to say.
Starting from the physiological aspect, I think we all need to have a constant starting point to a dive. Physiologically, meaning starting always with the same levels of oxygen saturation and CO2 levels. Now, both those things fluctuate through the day. I'm not constantly on the same level of oxygen saturation, and I'm definitely not constantly the same level of CO2. Personally, for example, when I'm completely restful on a couch or in bed or when I fall asleep, I do know that oxygen levels drop down to 95%, even lower than that, and oxygen and CO2 levels go up. So this would not be the right way for me to start a dive. Therefore, I should somehow manipulate the breathing to have a slightly higher levels of oxygen, coming back to about 98, 99%, and slightly lower levels of CO2. Everything has a normal range in physiology. Not every time I lower my CO2 levels a little bit, it means that I'm hyperventilating. It just means I'm someplace else within that range I can work with. First thing is having a constant pace. If I'm breathing in a constant rhythmic pace, it means I'm regulating my heart rate, meaning I'm regulating mostly the HRV, the heart rate variability. And when this is sitting right on my, or as close as possible to my normal baseline, it means I'm able to engage frontal cortex or involve cognition, meaning I can be both relaxed and focused and aware of the same time. If my breathing is not regulated, is not in a constant pace, and HRV is kind of sporadic or chaotic, I'll have a harder time focusing and my mind will be probably wandering and I might lose some important things I want to stay on top of. So I'm having a constant pace of, and this is the third aspect, of deep diaphragmatic breathing. Our mind is connected to the diaphragm through the phrenic nerve. Okay, the nerve sends the signals in one direction to the diaphragm of how and when to contract, but it can also send the signal back to the mind or back to the brain of what is my state, or tell it that through certain breathing pattern I'm in a restful or relaxed situation. So deep belly breathing that doesn't involve intercostal or higher chest breathing, deep diaphragmatic breathing, will signal the brain that I'm in a relaxed state or position and I can maintain relaxation. And the last aspect is the ratio between inhale and exhale. And the idea here is to have a longer exhale in comparison to the inhale. So I would always like to have the exhalation about 2, 3, 4 seconds longer. Doesn't matter which breathing pattern I use. It doesn't have to have a certain constant ratio like it was 1-2 or something like that, as they used to teach in past times. But it should always be longer, because a longer exhale again signals the brain to be more relaxed. It minimizes sympathetic activation, emphasizes parasympathetic activation, and allows the whole body to be softer, relaxed, and induce a calmer mental state as well. And when you have that whole idea of a breathing pattern, a constant breathing pattern with constant time and constant pace and constant patterns in which you have, you know exactly how many breaths you're going to take before you go, you can now add any other mental tool into it very easily, such as visualization or a body scan or whatever works best for you, and engage it into the process when you know and think it's most appropriate at a certain time. And this way you have the whole preparation structure built. And the last idea, to kind of wrap it all in a mental suit, so to speak, is the idea of a metacognition, which means basically it's thinking about thinking. And the idea is that when I know what I'm thinking about and I know what kind of effect that has, that this thinking process has on me mentally and even emotionally, then I have a better time of controlling my mental and emotional state, better time controlling my thoughts and the whole mental process, and eliminate the effect of my mind just wandering someplace else, thinking about things I maybe don't want it to be thinking about, or going some places I don't want it to go. So the whole idea is about a metacognition, focusing on the breathing, focusing on the diaphragm, focusing on pace, and then adding the mental tools into a well-designed mental process, bringing me eventually into the last big breath and the beginning of the dive.
So that was nice to hear from Tom, being a little bit more explicit about how exactly we can manipulate our breath before a dive. So let me tell you what I do before my dives recently. I'm in Dahab now. I'm training regularly, so I'm in a consistent style, let's say, of pre-dive preparation. And take this as a recommendation if you want, but by all means, find your own way. Let me stress that if you attempt to overly manipulate your breathing before a dive without really understanding the physiology of what you're doing, then it can certainly be dangerous. Please don't be doing any Wim Hof style breathing as your pre-dive ventilation, except in special circumstances. Any pre-diving breathing technique for deep dives should be done to aid relaxation, not with the aim to reduce the urge to breathe during the dive. So when I do my own dives, I often ask for a 2-minute countdown, like in competition. Even though I'm not that involved or even interested in competitions, I like the time cues because they allow me to set up a sequence and a ritual of actions that reduces the variability of my physical and mental condition before a dive. It also stops me from dilly-dallying and faffing around and ruminating on things before I dive. When the time is up, I have to go, I just go. Also, in the case where I don't use a countdown, I'll often simply say to myself, right, 10 more breaths or 6 more breaths, and I'll take those breaths, and whatever happens, I just go. As important as relaxation is, the dive starts after your head goes under the water. But let's say I'm using a countdown. The first minute I breathe through the nose using natural tidal breathing, letting the breath do its own thing, though I may gently place my awareness in my belly and feel the expansion there. Every so often, and I'm sure you felt this too, I might feel the desire to take an extra large inhalation with a deep, long and passive sigh out. Sighing is a natural and important component of autonomic breathing patterns. Sighs help maintain proper blood gas levels and contribute to the homeostatic regulation of psychological states. So just as much as we shouldn't actively take big, deep breaths for no reason during a breathe up, I also recommend you don't interrupt any natural inclination to take a deeper breath or to sigh. So this first minute of breathing is so quiet that someone sitting right next to me wouldn't hear it. If in fact I can't even hear it. I'm aiming for a base level of calmness, but also alertness. So I personally keep my eyes open and scan the landscape in the distance and the waterscape around me. I'm feeding into what Wallace Nichol called soft fascination in his book, Blue Mind. I defocus my attention and simply enjoy the expansiveness of the scene around me. My two favorite places to do this are at the Blue Hole here in Dahab and in Tulamben in Bali, looking towards Mount Agung. Studies suggest that the brain may be more active when the eyes are closed than when they are open, and I certainly feel this for myself. When my eyes are closed, I can get lost in all kinds of visual imaginations. When I hear the signal for 1 minute, I casually put on my nose clip. Then for about the next 2 to 4 breaths, and I cannot stress again that this is not something that I count or quantify, but for about the next 2 to 4 breaths, I inhale naturally for 1 to 2 seconds, allowing my belly to expand. My diaphragm moves down. I feel a little stretch there at the bottom of the ribs, which releases tensions. Then I will do a long exhale like a sigh through slightly pursed lips, very slowly without forcing. It's very similar to the way Walid described it. I go by what feels good. I don't count the length of the breath, but the exhale will be about roughly 6 to 8 seconds. In other words, a shorter inhale followed by a longer inhale. During that long exhale, I can actually feel my heart rate physically slow down, especially towards the pause at the end of the exhalation. And I like to lock my attention into that feeling. When I hear the 20-second mark, I do one last active purge exhalation where to empty the lungs, where I'll empty, almost to RV, and then I start the full breath. Now that's what I do. I'm not saying it's what you should do, but you should know that we have this powerful tool in the breath available to use and use wisely. Here is a wonderful ASMR-like audio clip of Alessia Zecchini describing her relaxation and how she does these longer exhales, but mainly we can enjoy this just for the pure joy in her voice. Alessia was on episode 18 of the Freedive Cafe if you want to check out her original story.
In the 2 minutes before my dive, I just lie on my back on the surface and I try to relax all my body, all my muscles, my mind, and I breathe. I breathe slowly, calm, relax, without doing a big breath, but just slow with my mouth. I try to do not a big inhalation, but a long exhalation. And I try to feel the water that is helping me, that is moving me, that is like relaxing me so much. And the sun on my face, on my wetsuit, that is warming me up. It's that minutes are so important to find the best focus for my deep dive. And when I heard the 20 seconds, I start to do the last breath, the huge last breath, and after I start to packing, and start my dive.
Before we move on to the next section, I would like to hear from at least one top-level static athlete describing his pre-dive preparation. Of course, unlike in most deep diving, big static performances are almost always aided by hyperventilation, with the aim to reduce the urge to breathe or delay the contractions, or both. Here is Rami Bladlav. Rami appeared recently on episode 133 of the Freedive Cafe.
My breath up for a big static apnea hold is very slow and effortless hyperventilation of 8 to 10 seconds exhale with 10 to 12 seconds inhale. It's less than 6 breaths per minute. For other types of training, I breathe differently, but this slow hyperventilation is only when I breathe up for a max attempt. I do it because I want to keep a very low heart rate before the breath hold. Usually, by doing long packing right before the start, my heart rate can increase a lot. And if I don't have a low BPM before long packing, it will increase more. Now you think, wouldn't it be better to just underbreathe or not thinking about breathing before breath hold? I don't know, but by control hyperventilation and breathing, I feel I can push my contraction a bit further without getting dizzy or feeling high. I don't like to feel dizzy or have tingling in my fingers before the start and breath hold. With those signs, I know that hypoxia will knock on my door much faster than usual, so I prevent this by breathing slow and keeping my heart rate low. So that is how I breathe up 2 minutes before long packing and start.
So that was just to illustrate that there are circumstances, especially in static apnea, where even more deliberate and conscious and structured breathing patterns may be used. For more information on Rami goes into quite a bit of detail about his methods of training for static apnea and gives lots of good advice to people who want to train static on that episode of the Freedive Cafe, episode 133. Freedive Cafe, this is not the Freedive Cafe, by the way, guys. Seem to be a lot of people confused about the fact that there are two different podcasts. Freedive Cafe is at freedivecafe.com or on all good podcast players. Okay, let's move on to the final component of today's discussion, the mind and what we can do with it. And I'm going to be getting into maybe slightly esoteric territory for some of you out there, depending on how used to hearing about meditation you are. First, let's hear from another one of our guests, absolutely top guy I was training with recently here in Dahab, who is now getting ready for Vertical Blue, which is starting in a few days, starting in about a week. Here is Stefan Randig. Stefan originally appeared on episode 10 of the Freedive Cafe. If you want to hear his story, sharing with us here his 2 minutes before his dives.
The last 2 minutes before a dive, if it is in a competition setting, I would be sitting on my noodle for buoyancy in an upright position. And basically I'm trying to get as calm and relaxed as possible. Would be breathing in a very natural and instinctive way, so there's not really any specific breathing pattern that I'm trying to follow. And then with so little time left before a dive, for me personally, I would say it's not so much about physical preparation anymore, apart from obviously getting really relaxed, but more about being in the right mindset. So for me, that would be becoming more of a passive observer. So I want to let go of the dive. What I would not do at this point is any type of visualization, but really let go of the dive and basically trust in all of the training I've done, all of the dives, all of the repetitions, and trust that once I start the performance, I will act instinctively and basically function completely on autopilot. Then, most of the preparation I would do breathing through my nose, as I find this very calming. And then with 1.5 minutes left, I would put on a nose clip. With a nose clip on, I would then take these last breathing cycles, breathing through the mouth. And then with 20 to 30 seconds left, I would start to fill my lungs with the last inhale. I would start deep down in the belly, expanding the belly, moving up into the chest, engaging the shoulders a little bit as well. And then it depends on the target depth. I would also add a certain amount of packing to add on that little bit of extra air to the full inhale. And then with all of that, I would be ready just after official top to start the dive.
So another typical response from the divers is the desire to have an inactive mind, not using so much of a particular thought pattern or visualization method, but rather just wanting to be free from intrusive and busy thoughts. Thibault Guignes has something similar to say on the matter. Thibault has done interviews on episode 17 and 79 of the Freedive Cafe.
Usually in the 2 minutes before my dive, I try to be in the moment. And for this, I just focus on my breathing. Not on breathing on a particular way, but just on being aware of my breathing, feeling each inhalation and each exhalation, just being aware of what I'm doing. This way my mind is clear, there is no space for stress or thinking of other things. I'm just in the moment, and that's what I want to do also during my dive. So it's how I feel I should be also before my dive.
So this desire to have an inactive mind, unbothered by thoughts, is every freediver's desire, but easier said than done. We all know about the monkey mind. Many of you will have sat down to try and meditate at some point in your life and found out that you're an absolute psychopath. Most of us would say that somebody who walks around on the street talking to themselves and talking out loud is some kind of crazy person, but you also know that we all do that anyway, just not out loud. And this monkey mind is a major issue, such a major issue that we don't even realize how much of an issue it has become. If you've been diving for a little while, and regardless of your depth, I'm sure you've experienced those times, those dives where you're just not feeling it. Maybe you do the dive and you don't enjoy it, or it's not a success because you were thinking too much during the dive. You might say you were psyching yourself out or giving yourself bad juju, or whatever term you want to use. For me personally, and the reason I love deep diving is that there are deep dives where my mind is switched off and I'm completely aware of only things that are happening in the present moment, only sensations that I feel and the experience presented to my senses. And then there are other dives, same depth, that feel challenging and difficult and even a little bit scary, because the whole way down and the whole way back up I was ruminating to myself in my head and thinking and talking and having discussions and dialogues and conversations with my head and just thinking too much. Now, I think the most common reason for these negative mental experiences is usually to do with something that is out of place downstream, which brings us back to the body. I mean, it could even have something to do with nutrition. It could be to do with whatever is affecting your nervous system, whatever you ate earlier that day, medication that you are taking. Making sure that the body is as physically relaxed as possible, coming to our relaxation techniques. And to the breath, making sure the breath is managed in such a way as to prevent agitation, but assuming that both the body and the breath have been taken care of as well as possible. We all sometimes succumb to intrusive and sticky thoughts that color or veil the present moment in a negative way. This is where training the mind comes in. The main way to train the mind is through some kind of meditative practice, specifically a concentrative meditative practice. And there are several methods of doing this, probably hundreds actually. The outcome of this practice should be that you are better able to spot intrusive and agitating thoughts as they appear and can quickly let them go to dissipate naturally, rather than identifying with them and allowing them to become the main focus of attention. It's a little bit like the difference between knowing that a movie is playing somewhere in the room but not being interested in it, and being sat in front of the movie completely engrossed in what is happening on the screen with what seems like no way to stop watching. Of course, meditation, mind training, and the multifarious traditions that describe these practices are another huge topic that is well beyond the scope of this podcast, but I can offer you some straightforward and simple instructions to get you started. A couple of important points here. It's only through 20 years of practicing meditation in some form or another, sometimes diligently for long periods of time and sometimes very irregularly, that I've been able to appreciate that yes, meditation has much potential to improve our lives on both deeper and superficial levels, but without consistent practice, it will not yield results. Almost every person who I've met through the years who claims to practice meditation usually talks more about practicing meditation than actually practicing, and the extent of their realization and ability to control the mind is reflected in this fact. If you wish to be better at keeping the mind open, spacious, and less infected with intrusive thoughts, you will have to commit to practicing regularly. If you practice regularly and diligently with the correct instruction, you will develop this ability, and it will carry into your pre-dive preparation and also your actual dives. I've practiced many forms of concentrative meditation through the years, but the one that I've settled on as the best suited to strengthening present moment awareness is a technique that I learned from Shinzen Young. Unlike most forms of concentrative meditation stemming from the Buddhist traditions, which use only the breath or the particular location where the breath can be felt as the main focus of concentration. Young, originally American and eventually ordained as a Zen Buddhist monk in Japan, teaches a kind of meditation that focuses on the subtle sensations of relaxation in the body. And this is the origin of the pre-dive technique. Maybe not the origin, but very intricately connected to the pre-dive technique that I teach my level 1 students, where I suggest inhaling into the diaphragm and when exhaling, releasing the small muscles in the face. It's the basis for the meditation technique I teach to my workshop attendees, and I can attest to its effectiveness, having practiced over the years to a greater rather than a lesser extent. I'm describing it in a bit of a rushed way at the moment, but if you have the chance to take the Freediving Lifestyle Workshop, I teach it there. I can teach it online if you get in touch with me, and I plan to release a full guided audio meditation on the YouTube channel in the not too distant future. To practice this meditation, take a comfortable meditative position. The first part of the practice is to feel the sensation of the breathing. On the inhalation, allow the diaphragm to passively expand and come back to this feeling of expanding belly with every inhalation. On the exhalation, release the small muscles of the face, the eyes, the cheeks, the jaw, and the tongue. Allow the face to kind of slide down. Return to this pleasant feeling of relaxation with every inhalation. Inhale belly, exhale face. That is the basis of your meditation. That's your basic object of meditation. The only element we have to add now is how to work with the thinking mind. This is very challenging. Again, patience and diligence are the key. To work with the thinking mind, we need to recognize that 3 basic kinds of thought can arise into our awareness. Talking and words, internal monologues and dialogues, etc., which we can simply call talking. 2, images and visual information, visual fantasies and imaginations, which we can call imaging. And 3 is a low-level hum of thought processing that doesn't quite surface as talking or imaging, but which we nevertheless feel is still there. Something's going on in the background, and we can call this subtle processing. Proceeding with the main practice of inhaling into the diaphragm and relaxing the face muscles with the exhalation. When you become aware that talking has begun, simply say talking to yourself. Actually say the words in your head. You may even say them out loud if they are very intrusive. And then just return to the sensations of the breathing. When you become aware that images or subtle processing is happening, simply say imaging or subtle. Sometimes there may be a mix of thoughts, so you might say talking, imaging. In other words, you are to label the thoughts as they appear. And this is very difficult. It sounds easy to say, but what really helps is having a guided audio to help you through this practice, which I'll be giving you more information about in a minute. It's a deceptively simple practice, but devilishly challenging in the beginning. But as you will find out for yourself, it can lead to great breakthroughs in how you manage and relate to your thinking mind. With time and practice, you will find more and more space opening up between thoughts, and this skill eventually carries into your day and positively experiences just your living of your life. I highly recommend getting a hold of the audiobook version of Shinzen Young's book, The Science of Enlightenment. It also contains several guided meditations which teach you the method I've described above. So that's what I would recommend when it comes to training the mind. I've heard people say that it's not important. I think those people have just never done it to the extent where they have felt the benefits. Of course, being able to limit intrusive thoughts in a deep dive is something that is valuable. And I personally feel that you can benefit from a technique like I've just described. It is a little bit difficult to explain in a podcast. Of course, I think you should read Shinzeng Young's book, even better, listen to it, or always feel free to get in touch if you have more questions about that. So that's all. I hope that you find some of the information in this episode has been helpful or inspiring. A great thanks to our guests for sharing their own pre-dive routines. As I said before, the scope of this article kind of grew beyond the original question I asked them several months ago when I began preparing this. So it might appear a little bit rambling and disjointed, but I enjoyed making it, and I hope you get something from it. Pretty much everything that I'm trying to teach people in my workshops, the advanced stretching, the deep relaxation, the meditation, all of it is included in there. And it's because I think that these three things, the body and the breath of the mind, attended to before the dive, maximizing the potential for relaxation in that area before the dive, really forms the basis for what more than half of deep free diving is about. Maybe that's just my personal view. Of course it is, but some of you might be on that train with me too. To take us out, let's listen to more of that fantastic voice of Alessia Zecchini's, which itself inspires a deep feeling of relaxation and preparation, and really makes me want to go and dive.
My thoughts on my breathing dive are simply the dive that I will go to do. I try to think about the first part of my dive, what I have to do immediately, and a bit of the movement, and I try to focus how to take my tag. But after I also try to don't think. It's like some images, and after don't think. I try to focus just about the feelings, the sensation of that moment, because in that exactly moments, in that minutes before start my dive, my mindset is the same when I am under the water. So I try to don't think. I just try to be 100% in the moment. So in that moment, I just think about the air that is coming in my body and is going out slowly. And I like so much to feel the wave and feel how they come. If they are a bit bigger, try to feel the rhythm. And so to have no problem with my breath, the water not coming in my mouth, because I feel the rhythm of the waves. I try to feel the sea. I try to connect 100% where I am and to enjoy more than I can all the moments.
That was a deep dive into breathe-ups, into pre-dive relaxation and breathing. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you got something from that. I much prefer to do these deeper, more extensive episodes with some solid information and not put out superficial content just for the sake of getting views on YouTube. I hope you appreciate it. Remember that you can read it on freediveandthrive.com if you prefer to read this as an article. The main website is freediveandthrive.com. You can find information about the courses that I do, the workshops that I do, the podcasts, the YouTube channel. Everything is up there. If you want to listen to the long form interviews, the original Freedive Cafe interviews are at freedivecafe.com. The YouTube channel is Freedive and Thrive. I'm on Instagram, Freedive and Thrive. If you want to chat on social, I'm there. And on Facebook, there's a couple of pages. There's the Freediving Journal and Freedive Cafe Podcasts Facebook page, and then also the Freediving Journal and Freedive Cafe Community Forum, which is a group where people can discuss the episodes. No one really does, but it's there. And that's about it. If you have any questions or suggestions, then always feel free to get in touch. And now I'm going to have to go and lie down because I'm tired now. It's 7 o'clock in the morning. And I'm already tired because COVID did me a number. All right. Until we meet again, dive safe.